Genesis chapter 8. Let's begin with verse number 4 and read together. I'm going to be reading out of the New American Standard, the 1995 update. Genesis chapter 8, beginning in verse 4, tells us, in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. The water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. Then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned to him in the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. So he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Then he waited yet another 7 days, and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. Now it came about in the 601st year, in the 1st month, on the 1st of the month, the water was dried up from the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth, went out by their families from the ark. May God bless the reading of his word. So at the end of verse 4, where we concluded last Lord's Day morning, we have the detail which tells us, and the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. Say that with me again, Ararat. Now, if you will please do me the favor of noticing again the word mountains is in the plural form, as we said last Sunday morning. That gives us the notation that we're speaking about a mountain range here. Many mountain peaks, which the highest known of this mountain range is Mount Ararat, which is 17,000 feet high. And that gives us some idea how much water and how high the flood must have been that it rose above the peak of Mount Ararat. And as it begins to recede, as the water begins to subside, the ark providentially comes to rest in this location so that it is upon this particular mountain peak. And let me remind you once again, this is only God's doing. Only God could be the one carrying this out. And so verse 5, the water decreased steadily until the 10th month. That's another 5 months. So from the start of the flood until this month, we are at this point, we are around 8 months. Then it says in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. All right, what we see here is that God has the whole world within the palm of His hand. He's got the whole world in His hand. And trust me when I tell you, class, that every detail of every animal, every person, everything about every individual is known in exactness by God above. The comprehensiveness of the knowledge of God. Class, for me, it's so staggering to think about this. That not even the smartest person in this room, which is not me, by far not me, that even the smartest of us in this room could not even begin to grasp all the genius of God and how sovereignly God is in control of this planet. So all of this that we've read down to the end of verse number 5, we're talking about the preservation of Noah and his family. They have been kept safe through it all by God. Again, was there a rudder on this ark? Was there any means of steering this ark? Who, class, was steering the ark of God? God was. But this leads us now to verse 6. And I want to talk for a few moments about, when I was a young kid in Bible class, one of my Bible class teachers, Lori Sanford, not kin to me, even though we had the same last name, said, "Jonathan, you have the patience of Job." And my mom said, "You don't know my son very well." But for a few moments, we're going to talk about the patience of Noah. Maybe you've never thought about the patience of Noah. But I want for just a moment to consider this. Let's be honest. Are we a very patient people? No. I was driving through the backwoods of Alabama a few weeks ago, and the kids were commenting on how they'd love to live in a place like this. And I said, yeah, until you found out that the nearest Taco Bell is over an hour away. When you live in Houston, you become sort of used to being near everything, right? And when you live out in the country, you have to learn a little bit of patience. No, we want what we want, and we want it when we want it, which I always say is right now. But think about it, class. Noah had to wait and wait and wait in this ark. And waiting is not an easy thing for a hard-working man or woman like Noah. So we read in verse 6, then it came about at the end of how many days? Look at that with me. It came about at the end of how many days? 40 days. So if you've noticed, this here is another 40-day period. The verse continues, at the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark, and it reminds us who made the ark? Noah. Class, this window is not a side door. I've heard some people kind of refer to it as a side door. It's not a side door. It's kind of like a hatch that's on top of a roof that Noah could swing back with a lever. So Noah opened the window. Verse 7 says, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Now, a lot of the time, as I've heard this taught over the years, people will ask me or have asked other teachers, Jonathan, why did Noah send out the raven first? You ever stop and think about that? It's very simple. Because ravens tend to fly at a much higher altitude, especially higher altitude than the next bird we see, which is a dove. A raven flies at a higher altitude, and ravens have a much wider diet than a dove. And if you think about it, Noah is sending this raven out much in the similar fashion to the way Joshua sent out the spies to spy the land of Canaan. You see, here in this situation, if the raven does not come back, what's the clear indication? If the raven did not come back, what's the indication? That there's dry land, right? At least in the higher elevations. That the water will have receded to a certain level. Now, I know it's not stated here, but what is almost certainly implied, listen very carefully because I don't want you to miss this, is that this raven did return. You say, Jonathan, how do you know that? Well, because a raven is an unclean animal, right? If you study ravens, you'll know they're an unclean animal. And how many of every unclean animal? 2. So if it flew out and didn't return, guess how many ravens you have left to repopulate the earth? 1. So even though the Bible does not say it, I feel pretty confident in believing that the raven did come back. If you disagree, that's okay too. Then we read in verse 8, then he sent out a dove. Now, obviously, class, a dove does not fly near as high as a raven, right? So a dove would fly into the lower lands, and we know would have a much narrower diet than a raven. And so Noah, verse 8 says, he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. To me, that's incredible, class. That shows that Noah is a very strategic individual. That's him using some very wise strategy. I don't know if God, if maybe the Bible doesn't tell us and God told him to send the raven and then we're not told, but either way, it's very strategic here. Very shrewd in how he's trying to determine what the water level is by sending the raven out first and the dove out next. Verse 9, though, says, but the dove, what? Found no resting place for the sole of her foot. So she returned to him in the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Now, that water being over the surface of all the earth is a nice look back to what? In the beginning, that's right, when the water covered all the surface of the earth. In other words, class, the water still covered the land. Yes, the mountain peaks were exposed, and the ark was resting on top of one of those mountain peaks. But down in the valleys and down in the meadows and down in the lower lands, it's still what? Flooded. That's right. I love the last part of verse 9. Look at that with me. A lot of people miss this. It says, then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. As a kid, I constantly tried to grab birds. I wasn't very successful at it. But I don't know if I'm part cat or dog or what. But for some reason, as a kid, I always tried to grab birds. I'd see them nesting somewhere, just sitting there unexpected, and I'd try to grab them. I was too slow, right? I was never fast enough, except for one bird, and that was my pet parakeet. I was always fascinated, though, even as a kid, by reading this part of the verse, that here's Noah and this dove, and he takes the dove into his own hand and brings her into the ark to himself. Let me ask you, I want you to answer this. I want you to answer this. Class, why would Moses include this little detail that Noah put out his hand and received the dove back in the ark? Why do you think Moses included that? You got the answer? Well, I want the answer. But who is it showing the caring of right here? Showing the caring of Noah, is it not? That Noah on this ark? Yeah. That's right. That as they're on the ark, Noah gave tender care and attention as he helped to care for these animals. Cliff? Yeah. I don't know the exact reason why he sent out the female, but you got a thought on that? Come back to the nest? Maybe so. Nesting sense. The male dove might be like, freedom, hey! I don't know. That's just always been an interesting detail to me. Verse 10. 3 words. Verse 10, 3 words. So he, what is it? Waited. Folks, on display in those 3 words is the patience of Noah. Waiting on God to move this whole enterprise forward. It says, so he waited yet another 7 days. And again, class, I don't want you to miss out on this. Please note the specificity of even the number of days. Good folks, the Bible is recorded with absolute perfection and precision. And at the end of verse 10, we read what? And again, he sent out the dove from the ark. Verse 11, the dove came to him toward evening. Another detail, right? It wasn't morning. It wasn't high noon. It wasn't even in the afternoon. No, the dove returned back in toward evening. And the implication is she's been flying everywhere. Let's keep going. And behold. It's a big word here, church. And behold. Like this is a big deal, right? In her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. Now, class, an olive leaf is not going to be growing on top of a mountain. An olive leaf requires a different climate. And obviously, it would be growing down near the base of the mountain. And so Noah, we read here from this indication, knew that the water was abated from the earth by the mere fact that the olive leaf is brought back. I'm just going to be honest with you, class. This is all very ingenious on Noah's part. Patsy? Right. So it has been uncovered from the water long enough that now you have this olive leaf sprout. I don't know time of how long, Patsy, it would have taken for that olive tree, uncovered from the water to have sprouted this olive leaf, but we just know that it had happened, right? Yeah, great question. Any other questions on that? Verse 12. Then he waited. Here's the second time we see that word waited. In other words, and this is something that's big for me here, Noah didn't attempt to get ahead of God. I mean, let's just be honest. Would you maybe have tried to get ahead of God here? I don't know. But Noah didn't. Noah wasn't attempting to get ahead of God. Instead, he waited on God. This verse continues, he waited another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him. Again, I think we understand what that means, that the water had receded to such a point that there were many resting places for the dove. And this makes it clear to Noah, hey, we are finally coming to the point when God is going to call us out of this ark. Verse 13, now it came about in the 601st year, which, by the way, that's referring to the age of Noah. In the first month, on the first of the month, the water was dried up from the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark. Now, of course, I think we've made this clear, but just in case, the roof had to be sealed in such a manner that no water could make its way into the ark. We know that there was a sealant around the entirety of the ark, but especially here, as we're referencing the roof of the ark, we know that the roof had to be sealed so that no water could come in the ark. But what we've just read makes it clear that Noah removes the covering of the ark, and it says, and looked. So somehow, I don't know exactly how, but some way, somehow, he was able to position himself almost like a telescope and look out, and behold, this is what he saw. What? The surface of the ground was dried up. Class, can you just imagine how excited Noah must have been to look out and actually see dry land for the first time of all these many months of being on this ark? Verse 14, in the second month, on the 27th day, we're down to the day of the month, says the earth was what, class? Dry. All right, now we come, go ahead. He waited, he sure did. He sure did. We come to the question that I get asked more than any other question about the entire flood narrative. This is the one question I always get. Would anybody like to take a guess on what that question is? How long was Noah and his family on this ark? Well, after many years of debating this with my own study, I am anywhere between 370 to 377 days. That's the range. Some people are pretty right on one day. Some people say 375. Some people say 377. Some people say 371. You got to understand the lunar year, the way the Bible denotes a year is a little different than we do. You do all those calculations and you get around 370 to 377. Cliff?
I'd like to hear your opinion. I've heard it said that the calendars were based off of Noah's year,
Mm-hmm.
and another one was the calendar was based off of the Hebrew.
Yeah, it's a lunar year. And I believe it's based off the lunar year. Yeah, 360 days instead of our 365 and what is it, 365 and 1/4? Yeah. So if you take that lunar year calendar and you do the chronology, you get around that period of time. Some people don't count the last the 7 days that is spoken of. But here's the way I answer it. And I think I said this to somebody last Sunday when they asked me this after class. If I'm just generally answering, I always say a little bit over a year. Because I think that's the best way to answer it. A little bit over a year. I have too. I've heard that. Yeah. That's where I fall, but that's okay. No, Noah's not writing this at all. Yeah, and some people in arguing this would have said, well, Moses didn't know about the lunar year. You know, it's an argument. That's why I always just say it's a little bit over a year. You start getting into the exact number, and it gets a little hairy. Yes, sir.
Did the animals reproduce
During the year that they were on the ark? I've debated whether or not God supernaturally halted that during that time period. Is it possible that God could have put that on a hold? He could have, or they could have reproduced. We just don't know, really and truly. Have increased, yes. And the responsibility would have increased. Would have increased, that's right. So I think it's possible that God supernaturally imposed a halt on the reproduction, not only of the animals, but I also believe it's possible that he put a halt to the mamas and daddies reproducing on the ark as well. I can't verify that, but there's no indication that there were any babies on the way of a human variety during that time. What's that? Hibernation, yeah, I mean, it's possible that, yeah, a food, yeah. There's many theories on how the responsibilities of that many animals could have been carried out by Noah and his family. Kentucky. Yeah. To think about 8 people carrying out the responsibility that would be feeding and caring for and disposing and is quite substantial for a year. Any other comments? I thought there's... Yep. In whatever time needed. That's right. Yep. Yep. Yes. Yeah, 5 or 6 days of rain. Yeah, we it would blow our minds to see that much water coming in. It'd make Harvey look like a puddle. I'm sorry, y'all, I wasn't here, but yeah, he would never do it again. We'll see that next week. That's right. I cannot help but believe, class, that there is a lesson here for us. God has a perfect time. And there's a perfect reason for everything under heaven. And I believe that it is a mark of a maturing believer that you're able to wait on the Lord the way that Noah did here. The next thing that I want us to note, I want us to talk about the departure of Noah and his family. How many of you have tried to fly recently? I got a friend of mine, I've told y'all about him on Wednesday nights. He and his family are missionaries in West Africa. Well, they were home recently. They live in Georgia when they come home with his parents, and they were trying to fly out of Atlanta. Did y'all hear what happened in Atlanta? It was awful. I mean, awful, awful, awful. They waited for 3 days in that airport trying to get out of there. Delta. It was awful. Departing, you know, whenever you're getting ready to go on a trip, I know for us a couple of weeks ago, we packed up everything. You're just ready to go. You're ready to get on the road, and you hope you hadn't forgotten something, right? That's always when you're driving out of the driveway. I hope we didn't forget something. And the worst feeling is you get down the road about 50 miles and realize, Betty, I left something back at the house. We got to go back, right? That's a horrible feeling. But it's about that time. Noah's departure time has arrived. Verse 15. How many times are we? Then he waited, then he waited, then he waited. God spoke to Noah saying, verse 16, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Class, Noah was to be the spiritual leader who would lead his family out of the ark, just like what? He led them into the ark. Just like He kept them and sustained them throughout the journey. And now He's going to lead them out of the ark. And it was God, the same God who commanded Noah to enter the ark, is the same God that's going to command him now to leave this ark. Verse 17. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. In other words, class, nothing was to be left behind on the ark. It kind of reminds me, how many of you ever moved out of a house? Raise your hand. Or moved out of an apartment? You ever just wanted to leave something behind? You're supposed to leave a broom in the closet? There have been times in our lives we've moved, oh man, because Jennifer was in the Army when we first married. I mean, we've moved a lot, and I hate moving. I mean, I absolutely detest it. And every time we move and we find, when you've gotten everything out of the house but a few things, you start debating, well, can't we just leave it? Can't leave anything on the ark. It all has to exit. The verse continues, that they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. This is all part of God's inscrutable plan to repopulate the planet after the flood. Again, that there had to be two of every kind of animal, as well as male and female humans, in order to repopulate, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. This is all going to go according to God's plan. Verse 18. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Now, I don't know about you folks, but wow, this feels like, even in this study, feels like, wow, we finally got here. I remember when we first started this class thinking, I wonder what it's going to be like when we start studying that old flood. I remember standing up here that first Sunday morning. Phil had just finished up his class and talked about how much work it was for Phil in the class that he had just finished, and how thankful we were for him. And now we've got all this to go. And wow, it seems like such a daunting task. By the way, how many chapters are there in Genesis? 50, right? We got a long way to go still. But this kind of reminds me when we would drive from Alabama to California when I was a kid. See, my parents didn't believe in flying, so we'd drive everywhere. And we would get into Texas on Interstate 10. And you know how they play that trick on you that has El Paso on the sign? That's what this feels like to me, like in terms of the study, like, yeah, we're out of Louisiana, we're into Texas. Oh no, it's going to take us this long to get through the state of Texas? That's why my dad, after the first time, we would always go north, so we'd just go through the little panhandle of Texas, because that made it feel like it was so much less, right? But no, this is a big moment. Not only for Noah and his family, but for us in this class. I mean, we have gotten out of the ark. I think about it, though. I mean, could there have been a little apprehensiveness about getting out of this ark? What are we about to see?
What you just said a few minutes ago, because did Noah not look and see the dry land?
Yeah.
In my mind, I would say, let it go. I can see dry, but Noah did.
No.
And you said a few minutes ago, he waited until God told him to.
Gave him the okay. But I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm one of those sons' wives. And Noah said it's time to leave his ark. And I see a little dark cloud over in the corner. I see a little dark cloud. I'm not sure I'm getting off. I think it may rain. I'm just being funny, but I mean, I don't know. They could have said, hey, I think we're going to stay on this ark a little bit longer. No, they didn't. Noah led his entire family out of the ark. What does verse 19 say? Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth. I love this next statement. Went out by their families from the ark. If you could just imagine, class, this was like a grand processional coming out of this ark. Family after family after family after family after family. This grand processional, like a big, how many have ever been to the Macy's Day Parade? I marched in that thing one year. You line up in the street, they don't tell you this on TV, but you line up in the street at 4 o'clock in the morning. You're lined up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And the morning that I marched in the Macy's Day Parade in 1996, it was 12 degrees outside. And I played a brass instrument. I won't tell you some of those details, but it was not something I was prepared for. This was a big affair. I mean, and the indication that the scripture gives us here, who is leading them out of this ark? Noah. It wasn't like Noah and his family just got out of the ark and said, y'all have at it. No, the indication is that Noah and his family, they're guiding these animals, this procession, out of the ark until it's all empty. I can't help but wonder, when everything emptied the ark, did Noah walk up to the edge of the opening ark, look in there and just go, wow. And we're going to see next week, without, you know what they call spoilers, right? Spoilers. What's Noah's first reaction when all this is done, right? When it's all said and done, everybody's off the ark. What's the first thing that Noah does, class? Built an altar, offered sacrifices. What do we call that, church? Worship. All right, here's your chance. Before I close up, let me say this. How important is it that we are obedient to the Word of God? How important is it, class, that we are obedient to the Word of God? Critical. A saving faith is a working faith, an obedient faith, the faith of Noah. All right, here's your chance. Any questions? We're going to close the chapter on the flood today, and we're not going to look back. So here's your chance. Any final questions or comments you have on the flood? Water saves. Sure does. 1 Peter, I love it. Anybody else? Anna? Yes. Yes. It's God's Word. It's God's telling of the account of the flood. Every word is true.
We haven't found the ark.
No, we have not.
There is a Mount Ararat.
Sure is.
How close is it to where they live?
How close is it to where?
Mount Ararat, from where Noah lived. Yeah,
I don't know.
they were on the water a long time.
Yeah, we don't know. Phil? Hold on a second, everybody. Right. That's the location they believe that it is currently. Yes. For the first brother, go ahead and then I'll get back to you, Anna. And a little ark. Yeah, that's beautiful, Anna. Yeah, and try to discover on their own. Yep. If ever the ark is fully uncovered, listen, I don't know how anybody could see that and go, oh, then that's just hogwash. Yeah, sure are. They did. They had to climb down the mountain. I hadn't even thought about that. All right, here's what we're going to do. Close the book on the flood. See y'all next Sunday morning, Lord willing. We'll head to El Paso next. All right, thank y'all. Have a great afternoon.